So Don't Blink. I usually like to give a little synopsis.
Sure.
But in this case, I thought of a riddle. So my riddle is, okay, I knew I was going to forget it. I didn't write it down. Let me think here. All right, riddle. 10 friends go on a vacation in the woods together. 10 of them disappear, and 1 does not. How does that happen? Hey guys, welcome back to another edition of Scaretastic Podcast, a podcast where I invite a guest on. We talk about a movie. My name's Brienne, and the movie we're talking about tonight is Don't Blink, and my guest is the person who wrote and directed it. His name is Travis Oates. Hi, Travis.
Hi, glad to be here.
Well, thanks for being here. I love this movie. I'm so excited about it. I love when writers reach out and talk with their fans on social media and allow me the opportunity to just gush about how much I like it. You know, I love talking about movies. I try not to do it while I'm watching the movie, but it's really hard to not keep my mouth shut, so to be able to talk to you who wrote it is just thrilling. So, I do want to get into all of that, but first I want to get to know a little bit about you, such as where you grew up, what kind of kid were you, how was your family, what do you like now, married, kids, all that.
Sure, yeah. I grew up in Canada, actually. Grew up in Prince Rupert, British Columbia, which is a little town about 1,000 miles up from Vancouver. So, you know Alaska, the little tail on Alaska, the rat tail on Alaska? I was at the very end of that rat tail, basically.
Oh, must have been beautiful.
It was. I grew up on an island. Yeah, it was. You know, a lot of stuff you take for granted. Now that I live in L.A. and I have a 2-year-old son, you know, I really do kind of wish that he could experience some of the. I mean, you know, our backyard was just a giant forest that went on for just forever, and so he doesn't quite have that here in L.A. But I guess he has other things that I didn't have when I was a kid.
Well, once he gets a little older, you know, take him back over there, because at least, you know, think about taking kids that young places. They don't remember it, and it's almost not fair. Like, my folks taking me to Disney World or whatever when I was a kid. I don't remember it. Take me when I'm 25, then I'll remember.
Yeah, my dad still lives there, so he'll have opportunity, and I have relatives that are still there. But yeah, and I was actually born in the United States, but my parents moved to Canada when I was young. So I moved back to the United States when I was about 16 years old, and I was actually a music major in college. I was a music composition major. I wrote a bunch of musicals. Actually wrote a musical called Manhattan Underground, which is about vampires that got produced in San Francisco and Chicago, off-Broadway in New York. And it's actually one of the things that people are bugging me about bringing back, since vampires are kind of a hot commodity now. But I kind of feel like I missed that curve. Like there was an opportunity where I probably could have, right at the height of Twilight, maybe done something with that musical. But it is very hard doing a movie musical of a musical that nobody has heard of. That's actually more difficult to get off the ground than you would imagine. But, you know, someday maybe.
I'm a huge musical fan. One of my favorites, Little Shop of Horrors. If you were to make a musical now, though, to, like, stay with the trend, you'd probably have to do one about aliens that have, like, tentacles and are all spidery and octopusy. That seems to be all the rage these days.
some kind of a weird would look like that. You know, or Vampire Hamilton. You know, that might work. But, and so I moved to Los Angeles. Before I moved to L.A., I had a sketch comedy group called CIA Comedy in Action, or Comedians in Agony, and we had a local cable show, and it was myself and a guy who's done okay in the business named Jeremy Renner. And so he and I had a comedy group together, and he moved to LA before I did, and then he did a film called National Lampoon Senior Trip, which was his first film, and he invited me to come to LA and said he would help me out, and I took him up on it, and so that's what got me here. And I started kind of more of as an actor here, and kind of evolved over time into a writer. I'd always been a writer, but I kind of found that was where I was having more success as a writer and a voiceover actor. Most people would not know me as a writer-director. They would really know me as the voice of Piglet for Disney, and the voice of, I've been a voice of a lot of different famous characters, but Piglet's the one that stuck around the longest. And I owned a theater called Acme Comedy Theater. If you were in Los Angeles, you would know about that. And us and the Groundlings. I owned that for about 5-6 years and was mostly involved, ironically, in comedy. Most of what I do as a writer is I do punch-up work for films for comedy, although my passion is more to write kind of science fiction, fantasy, horror type stuff.
That's really funny because when I was trying to find out information about you, I did see like voiceover. Definitely, the Piglet thing was everywhere. The Acme group and all that. But here I am watching this movie, and I'm like, well, where did that come from? Out of a lifetime thus far of mainly doing things like that.
Yeah. It was definitely I've written. Oh gosh, well, I wrote pilots for a long time. See, the interesting thing about it being a writer in Los Angeles or anywhere, I guess, writer for television and film, is you can make a very good living for a very long time writing stuff that nobody will ever hear of and that will never show up on IMDb. I sold 6 pilots in 3 years, but if the pilot doesn't become a series, doesn't stay on IMDb, it's there while it's being done, but then once it doesn't get picked up, it's gone. And the same with film. I've sold, I think, 8 films to major studios, including the sequel to The Omen. I wrote the sequel to The Omen for Fox, and I wrote a sequel to The Wizard of Oz for MGM. All stuff that was bought, but then if it's not made into a film, it doesn't show up on IMDb. So you can make really good money. And then, of course, the other thing I do is I'm a punch-up guy, and I'm brought in for dialogue polishes a lot, too. And that never shows up on IMDb.
Well, as long as the paychecks keep showing up, that's the important part.
Exactly. Like, I worked for Disney for over a year with John Lasseter. I mean, literally, all my meetings were with John Lasseter and these other people. I worked on planes. I worked on a bunch of stuff for Disney. But, none of that will show up on IMDb. None of that is, nobody knows. But, yeah, it's good money. And the main reason that I did Don't Blink, because it's a small independent film, I did it because I had a friend of mine, Zach Ward, who's in the film and is a producer on the film, and he was looking to produce something for the first time. And I said, I will write something for scale if I can direct it. And that was the deal. And so horror films are the easiest films to make any profit off of. And I had written, like I said, I wrote the sequel to The Omen. I'd written some horror films before. We decided to do a horror film, and that's how that came about. So
that's pretty cool. Yeah, I thought you were going to say you wrote it because you wanted to get your name on IMDb as a writer and director.
The whole point, yeah. So I said I'll do it as for scale if I can direct, because I just wanted something to show up, on IMDb, so that I could actually say I'm a writer and people could look it up and I could prove it, but so.
Well, it sounds like you are a writer. That's what you've been doing. You punch stuff up, you write a lot. So you're like a behind the scenes guy that has a steady job and you're creating all this content. You're just not getting your name out there like, hey, I did this.
Right.
But that's kind of cool in a way, though. You never really think about the people behind the scenes who are making this stuff happen.
Right.
No matter how it comes out on the other end, there's a slew of brilliant people working on this. And to me, that's what's most interesting. It helps me appreciate independent films, musicals, plays, and books, and you name it, all that much more, to actually know that there's a person just like me who's like in the background writing. I mean, not just like me, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I had done a bunch of short films, and I had done a bunch of music videos leading up to that. Because when I owned Acme, we had a media offshoot called Acme Brand Comedy. And so for a while there, we were like making a comedic video a day. I wasn't doing all of those, but I was doing maybe one every 2 weeks was something that I directed. And so we were, I was churning out content. So I'd known for a long time that I had wanted to be a director. I was a stage director. At Acme, I was the creative director, and I ran the main company shows and everything like that. So I directed plays, and like I said, I was a musical director, and so I directed that musical before, and another musical that I had written, I directed. It's called Gothic, which was about Jack the Ripper. I'd been a director, and I knew that that's what I wanted to do eventually, and that's kind of where I've gravitated.
Going back to the Acme group,
Sure.
Is that the same one that Adam Carolla started out in or helped create? I think I read it in his book.
Yeah.
Was that the one?
That is the one. Adam Carolla came from Acme. Alex Borstein, Joel McHale. Who else? I'm sure I'm missing some big names. I'm sure they'll come to me right in the middle. Inconveniently, we're in the middle of this interview. And also, we were known, Groundlings were kind of known more for Saturday Night Live folks and actors. Acme in the industry was known more for writers. Like, we had a lot of famous Emmy Award-winning writers. The folks that were behind Tiny Toons and Animaniacs, those were Acme folk. In fact, that's why the place was called Acme, is the guy who started Acme was a writer for, I think, Tiny Toons was what he was writing on at the time.
Love Pinky and the Brain, by the way. Huge Pinky and the Brain fan.
Yeah, and that actually, some of my first jobs were, as a writer, were writing on animated shows that were being show run by people from Acme. So alumni that had come before me. I'm trying to think of, I think Freakazoid. I wrote an episode of Freakazoid, and what else was it? There were a bunch of cartoons back in those days. What was the history one? Hysteria? Something like that. It was the one that came after Animaniacs. It didn't do as well. I can't remember the name of it, but
Animaniacs is hard to follow.
It was, and they tried to do the Animaniacs. I think it was called Hysteria. I want to say it was historically based, and they tried to do the Animaniacs format. It's very hard to like capture lightning in a bottle twice, and they'd already done it twice. Quite frankly, they'd done it with Tiny Toons and Animaniacs, and they tried a third time and didn't work out as well.
Yeah. So now going back to musicals, man, you've got a lot. I want to get to Don't Blink, but you have so much going on. You're so interesting. I don't know where to how to transition over, but I do want to ask you about musicals because I grew up listening to a whole bunch of musicals. There's some big ones that I haven't seen yet. Shame on me, but I remember the first one I watched. I was in music class in 7th grade, and we had a really super awesome music teacher, Mr. Martin, and he had us watch My Fair Lady, and he broke down. We watched it in class, and however long they are, 40 minutes, and he would, excuse me, and he would play it, and every couple of minutes he would pause it and explain the sense of humor behind what was just said. He would explain the British words and what they meant. The British words, I don't know what I'm saying, like the linguistics, how they spoke differently and what it actually translated to in American English. And he gave me a really good appreciation for that movie, and I understand it inside and out now because of that. And then, of course, I mentioned Little Shop of Horrors is my all-time favorite. I mean, Audrey, I do this thing called Smool, which is a karaoke app on your phone, and I've done Suddenly Seymour and the Dentist song and Feed Me Seymour on there. So now that I've just blathered on about my favorites, what are some of the musicals that influenced you, and how did you even get into that?
I think the very first musical I ever heard, at least the first musical that ever really captured my brain and wouldn't let go, was probably Jesus Christ Superstar, which is an odd one for like a 8 or 9-year-old to grab onto. But it was something that my parents would listen to, and that was kind of my introduction to what could be done with a musical, because when I thought musicals, I thought more of things kind of like the standard musical of, like the Carousel or and I'm not putting those kind of musicals down, but kind of the South Pacific, where they were kind of, here, we have a little scene, Music Man, and then somebody starts to sing, and then we have a little scene, somebody starts to sing, and Jesus Christ Superstar was the first thing that I'd ever seen where it was just all music, and it was also very emotional, and people, I mean, it was a different animal, and that I really loved that. And Little Shop of Horrors, by the way, is one of my favorites too. But yeah, that started to get. When I was young, I was musical gifted when I was young. From a composing standpoint, I was a natural composer. I started composing music when I was 12. And really complex stuff. And actually, when I wrote Manhattan Underground, I wrote it when I was 17. And I almost got into the Guinness Book of World Records because I was the youngest person, I still am, according to Guinness, the youngest person to ever write a musical where I wrote the book, the lyrics, and the score all myself and had it performed by professionals. But Mozart wrote an opera when he was like 12 or something, so that I didn't get in the book because they considered opera the same as a musical. But that was kind of an interesting moment in my life where it was like, I may get in the Guinness Book of World Records, but
I'm gonna beat Mozart.
Mozart, how dare you? But if you get, I mean, I guess that's Mozart, but
Curses.
but yeah, and my music, the kind of music that I was writing was more along the lines of like a Les Miserables or a Jesus Christ Superstar or something along those lines. The first one I wrote, which was Manhattan Underground, was a little bit more traditional in that I didn't have the whole thing was music. And then Gothic was more like Les Miserables, where there was no actual talking. There was just singing throughout the entire piece. But
that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. I'll tell you that.
Wow.
I couldn't do it now. I couldn't write the score now to save my life because I haven't done that. I was offered a full ride to Juilliard.
Wow.
Yeah, when I was 17, I was offered a full ride to Juilliard with the caveat that I would have to get my master's degree at least. And when I went there, they at the time there were newspaper articles about me and about the musical, and they were saying like, oh, this kid's the next Andrew Lloyd Webber, and that was who they were comparing me to musically, And so when I went to Juilliard and I met the guy who was going to be in charge, who was the head of the music program there, he said something about the fact that he loathed Andrew Lloyd Webber, and I was too young to like all I could think of, well, is this guy going to hate my music? I don't want to be here for like 8 years with somebody who absolutely hates my music. So I turned down a full ride to Juilliard. My mom hasn't forgiven me for that, but I turned down a full ride to Juilliard just because I was like, I don't want to be miserable for 8 years. I mean,
yeah, well, that's good foresight to have. You don't really know if you would have been, but I
don't know.
Go with your gut instinct, and things typically work out. Seems like you're doing just fine.
I mean, I went down a very different path. It was right after I turned down Juilliard that Jeremy and I put a group together. So I mean, it's interesting. It was somewhere in an alternate universe. I would love to see how that worked out for me. I'd love to see how the Travis Oates who decided to go down that musical path.
There's your next sci-fi movie.
Yeah.
Parallel world type deal.
But
throw in a little horror while you're at it.
Got it. Yeah, throw in a little horror.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of horror, and also speaking of, you said you do a lot of punch-up work.
Sure.
That makes so much sense because as I'm watching Don't Blink, there were so many funny things in this movie and great one-liners that just had me laughing like that big like yelp laugh where I'm like, ha! and I wrote them down and I started running out of room. I give myself little like sections on my notepad to write stuff down, and I've got like quotes and quirks like that I like. Oh. And I'm like, holy crap, I'm starting to write tiny and tiny as I go on because there's just so many funny things, funny dialogue that now that explains it, I can see how you'd be great at punching stuff up. So before we talk about that, no,
you're still there.
Okay. Oh no.
Nope. I think you're still there. All right.
Okay. Phew. What did you hear me say last?
Got tinier and tinier, and I think that's the last thing I heard.
Okay. So yeah, I was taking notes and I was writing down some funny one-liners because usually there's a one or two that I like to throw out there when I'm talking with the writer. And in this case, I'm like running out of space to write them all because there's so many. So that explains, I can see why you do so much punch-up work now because these were great.
Okay.
So Don't Blink. I usually like to give a little synopsis.
Sure.
But in this case, I thought of a riddle. So my riddle is, okay, I knew I was going to forget it. I didn't write it down. Let me think here. All right, riddle. 10 friends go on a vacation in the woods together. 10 of them disappear and one does not. How does that happen?